It's 4 o'clock, and I'm sure that you guys have had a long day, and it's the end of the day here for us, and so we'll get started here. And want to thank everybody for joining us for our webinar, Operating an Essential Business During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I got to tell you guys, it feels a little bit weird for me to sit here in a pressed shirt and a sports coat. I haven't worn any of this in quite some time. Just to balance it out and make sure I didn't go into shock, I'm still in my sweatpants. So I'm feeling pretty good and comfy still. But, I didn't want to go into shock. I did manage to give myself a haircut last night. As you know, essential businesses do not include hair salons. So I had to take a shot of courage and bust out the clippers and see what I could do. No real complaints from my wife yet, so I think I'm okay. My name is Jeff Worley. I'm a partner here at Gibble, Crable, and Hess, and joining me today is Ian Brinkman, who's also an attorney here at GKH. And assisting us fielding questions and just generally making sure that this goes off without a hitch is one of our staff members, Hannah Grenier, who's going to later on field questions as they come up. Here's how we're going to break things down today. Ian's going to run down some of the procedures and requirements that have been instituted by Governor Wolf and Secretary Levine and their orders for businesses that are currently operational. I note that this presentation is not covering health facilities, so that's one of the, this is really just going towards essential businesses who are operating and what those requirements are for you as you are operational during this time. I also note that each situation is different. Each situation is unique. If you have specific questions as to your specific situation, you should contact us directly. This afternoon, our presentation is designed to sort of provide you with a general overview, but it does not constitute legal advice. The following was brought to you by our malpractice carrier. So, we will open this up for questions though, and we do want to make sure this is an engaging presentation. Otherwise, it's going to be two guys sitting in their respective basements with sports coats and sweatpants on talking to the computer. So, also note that we did just make available an overview of the requirements. That's a link on our website, gkh.com. And that was also mailed out to everybody as well. And that highlights sort of the presentation and what we're talking about today, but that's a resource for you as employers, a guide for you to look back over so you don't have to, Ian dived into the statute and the order so that you don't have to do it, and hopefully it's condensed into a readable format and one that makes sense for you. So Ian, why don't you take it away from here and start off with what the requirements are.
All right, and I'm also maybe experiencing some connection problems, so please bear with me. My lights just flickered actually. So I want to start by looking back at where we started and then where we're headed with this whole COVID-19 Pennsylvania's mitigation response. So around March 16th is when Governor Wolf first introduced the idea of closing or limiting access to non-essential businesses. And then very quickly after that, March 19th is when we got into this regime that we're in right now of all non-life sustaining businesses having to close their physical locations. And then life sustaining businesses may continue to operate. And then those that also receive waivers during the waiver process, which is also now closed, may continue to operate in-person businesses. Those lists and frequently asked questions that really help advise businesses as to which category they land in have changed many times. We have good resources on our website to navigate those types of questions. And most recently, Governor Wolf and Secretary Levine enacted an order that focuses on the health and safety of employees and customers that access life-sustaining businesses that are continuing in-person operations. So this is very much a health and safety focus type order, and it really is for employees and customers to maintain safety and avoid contracting the virus. Very importantly, this applies to in-person operations. So that, again, that is people on the life-sustaining business list, people that were given waivers and they're continuing their in-person operations, and then also people that are not allowed to continue in-person operations but are still performing essential functions at a business location, such as processing payroll, performing security and maintenance measures. So these apply in equal force to all three categories. It's important to note that these are employer requirements. Many of the requirements under the new order will be implemented and imposed by employees, but when it comes to enforcement by the state and who's going to be looked to make sure these are implemented the way that they're written lands on the employer. So it's important that employers take the lists and look at them and develop policies and then communicate those policies to their employees. And the communication of the policy is actually a requirement in the order. So even though the employees, again, are the people on the front lines and are often those that are going to be responsible on the day-to-day to make sure these things happen, it's eventually going to fall back on the employer to make sure that everything's running smoothly and that each one of the requirements is being met.
So Ian, that just basically then means that it's just as with any OSHA requirement or any other safety requirement, it is incumbent on the employer to enforce that. So if you have an employee who's saying, I don't want to do this, the employer has the right and actually the obligation to require the employee to follow the requirements.
Correct. Yes, and this has the force of law, and it will be enforced the same way that the business shutdown regime was enforced. The same type of mechanisms and the same type of requirements, and so your licensure boards and the Pennsylvania State Police will be the ones going around and enforcing these. So there's 3 or 4 broad categories that come out of the new order. They essentially are the cleaning requirements that businesses are going to need to adopt, how a business must respond to a confirmed or a supposed confirmed case of COVID-19. So when someone comes to the physical business location, whether an employee, a customer, a vendor, if they are later found out to be found positive for COVID-19 or very likely to be positive, what an employer must do. And then what an employer must do when they serve the public inside a closed off physical location. A 4th kind of flu category, you'll see this come, I'm not going to address it directly, are employee rules. So you'll see that, again, it's incumbent on the employer to create policies and implement the policies, but a lot of them will be that an employee must do this or must do that. So you'll see those kind of come out. So just going through those categories briefly, again, this will not be an exhaustive recitation of all the categories. I think we'll help a lot more by focusing on the Q&A at the end of this. And also you can see the full list of categories as annotated with guidelines from the CDC scattered about those on our website and what we recently emailed out. Luckily, a lot of these are pretty common sense, especially with the cleaning. So you need to focus on high touch areas. So any place where multiple people or a single person multiple times a day is going to come into contact with something. Cleaning is a 2-step process. It's dirt and then disinfectant. So you need to clean off the physical area, but then you're also trying to kill the virus. The CDC has a great resource that gives a list of hundreds of different chemicals that will kill the COVID-19 virus. The first and foremost being hydrogen peroxide. I know some of the more classic type of bleach or hand sanitizer, alcohol-based sanitizers are hard to get. So that's a good resource if you're struggling to find those types of things. Avoid sharing. So not only is it about 6 feet of physical distance, but it's also about, you don't share phones, you don't share office space, you try not to share writing utensils and office instruments and things like that to the best that you can. and then really focus on those things that you have to share by the necessity of only having one or a few in the business location, and really focus on cleaning those things well and frequently. You're going to need to provide some type of wipe or cleaning supplies to do these things. You can't require an employee to bring in their own stuff to clean the business. The order says wipes, but I think anything that's going to, by CDC or Department of Health guidelines, kill the virus and clean it would suffice. So if it's something that needs to be reused or washed in between, I think that would be okay, rather than just using a disposable wipe every time. And then also importantly, instructions for cleaning. You can't just hand your employees cleaning supplies and say, you know what to do. It has to be, sort of step-by-step instructions going through what places you want cleaned, how you want them to be cleaned, and how frequently you want them to be cleaned. And again, those more detailed advice is on our website. And then importantly as well is, you don't want to slack on your normal protocols. These are all supposed to be in addition to what you're already doing. So you as business owners and managers know your business better than anyone else. So you know what you have already in place goes a long way in making sure things stay clean, stay stable, stay consistent. And these new and additional requirements should supplement and bolster your current cleaning regimens and how you do those things. So, now more than ever, those things are equally as important. So moving on to
Before you move on, Ian, the handout that we just sent out to everybody, that does have links embedded in it for the CDC requirements. I think those notices are actually attached to our memo as well. So that's a good resource for you, and you don't have to go tracking all of those down there. They're in the resource that we're providing to you guys.
Yeah, and Jeff astutely brought up OSHA. In amongst those resources that we also send out are posters that have been developed by the CDC and by the Department of Health. So, it's one thing to hand out an email that has all these requirements on it, but you can post nice posters that really explain in its simplest terms what employees are expected to do and when and where and how they're supposed to do those things. So this will be a continuing conversation with your employees and something that is a lot like an OSHA type requirement. So however you deal with those types of things, this will be a similar protocol that you're going to put into place. So moving to if a probable or confirmed case is found to have visited the business's physical location, there are very detailed steps that you will need to follow. This particular section is where you're going to want to use our resources and the CDC resources, because it gets very specific based upon what type of exposure and what type of symptoms or lack of symptoms an employee or vendor is experiencing before or after an exposure is learned of. So this will be definitely the broadest overview of all the categories. So once you find out that someone has come into the business and is later confirmed or probable to be infected with COVID-19, the first thing you need to do is close off the areas where that person had visited and air out those areas. So open up all the doors and windows and obviously keep everyone away from those places. To the extent possible, it should be all the places that the person visited, but obviously the places where that person frequented the most and spent the most time. And then something that's a little counterintuitive is that you should wait to clean these places. So to the extent practicable, you should wait at least 24 hours before you send anyone in there to go clean up the surfaces where the person was or may have touched. It recommends that if you can wait even longer, wait a few days, because the virus, depending on what surface it's on, can kill itself out or die out on its own, making the cleaning effort that much more effective and easy. So to the extent possible, close off, air out, and then wait until you clean. And then follow the cleaning instructions. So a lot of these things will fall back onto cleaning or fall back onto self-isolation or 6 feet, depending on what type of interaction was had with this exposed person. After you close off and do the cleaning measures, you should also ID other employees that have come into contact with this person. So I'm going to throw some numbers at you here. The type of metrics that you should use is, there was an employee in contact with a person that is now a confirmed case within the past 48 hours. and were they within 6 feet of them for 10 minutes or more. So 48 hours, 6 feet for 10 minutes or more. If that's the case, then those persons who came into contact with the confirmed case need to follow CDC protocols on how to self-isolate or deal with the fact that they may have come into contact with an infected person. I'll go over them very briefly. They're just 3 categories. There are people that have no symptoms, there are people that have symptoms, and then how do you allow those employees to return after they have either exhausted the no symptom or symptom categories. So this will be your classic no symptoms. Employees are allowed to come back, but they must use the most extreme type of mitigation techniques. So they can't be within 6 feet of anyone. They must be diligent about wearing their masks. They have to wash their hands, and they should be cleaning all the surfaces that they touched constantly, because we know that a large majority of people that have COVID-19 do not show any symptoms, and they're merely spreaders. People with symptoms, then that's when we go into isolation. And there's, depending on when the symptoms occur, how severe they are, the isolation may last so long from their last contact or their last symptom. So this is, again, something that you'll look at our resources and advise employees who may have come in contact with these confirmed cases based on their own circumstances. And the same thing goes for isolation or for return. Isolation is, the length of isolation is based upon a variety of factors, and depending on which factors those employees hit will dictate how quickly they can return and under what circumstances they can return. Obviously, all employees should be monitoring themselves for symptoms, both before they come to work and while at work. And as soon as an employee feels like they are exhibiting symptoms of the COVID-19 virus, they need to notify a manager or the owner immediately, and then they should be sent home if it's found that those symptoms are indeed indicative of COVID-19. Another somewhat onerous requirement is that you will need to perform temperature screenings. So every employee should be screened, temperature should be screened, and if they have a 100.4 fever or above, they should not come into work or they should be sent home. Now, this requirement, again, is only if a business knows that they were in contact with a confirmed or a probable case. So this is not always, but just if someone has come into contact with the business, then you need to start doing the temperature screenings. There's not a lot of detail about the temperature screenings, but this may be something where the employer doesn't need to physically administer the temperature, but merely needs to require that an employee take their temperature and log that temperature before they come in. Some other sort of intuitive measures if the business comes into contact with a confirmed or probable case is space. Space is very important. So entries, exits, breaks, and meals all need to be performed within a 6-foot distance of everyone. So whether you're talking about employees all coming in at once to start the day or all leaving at once to end the day, or for their meal breaks or regular breaks, there need to be staggered or performed in a manner where everyone can maintain 6 feet of social distance. This even goes as far as there should be no front-facing type interaction. It should be all, forward-facing, eyes to backs of heads for breaks, for lunches, and to the extent that common rooms and places that can be avoided, that's also would be ideal. You need to provide your employees with soap, cleaning supplies, and you also need to make sure that all your employees wear masks. And that's a requirement for all employees under all circumstances must wear masks now, and this is a mandatory requirement. A lot of people are pushing back and a little worried about that. It does say that the employer must provide the mask, but we're interpreting this as the employer can provide instructions and possibly materials to their employees to make the mask. And the real requirement of the employee is that they must certify the mask is approved by the CDC. So the employer is sort of the gatekeeper as to what masks are allowed to be worn and which are deficient and need to be changed to meet the standard. And
Ian,
then,
is there any guidance as to employees who cannot wear masks because of a
yes.
medical?
Yes. So this is not a draconian type measure. So it's very important to be smart and practical about this. If employee cannot physically remove, or anyone in the physical business operation cannot remove the mask themselves, or cannot breathe normally or appropriately with a mask on, then they're not required to wear a mask. It'll be important, obviously, to make sure that those employees not wearing masks are even practicing further social distancing techniques. But you can work with your employees if a doctor tells them that they can't wear a mask, or if they would have trouble removing a mask in the case of an emergency. We need to be flexible, but in general, unless you have a mitigating circumstance, all employees are required to wear masks while on the physical premises.
And
That also,
I would just add to that if you as an employer have an employee who says, I can't wear a mask because I have asthma or some other factor that doesn't allow me to wear a mask, it's probably a good idea to reach out to us at that point, and let's walk through that. As I said, a lot of these are going to be case by case specific, and we're going to want to look at the factors and what's going on here. Are we looking at this from the ADA considerations, the Americans with Disability Act? Is this going to be a reasonable accommodation to not allow an employee to wear a mask? Or is that going to be considered an undue hardship for the employer, in which case you're providing that employee with time off because you don't want them in the workplace without a mask on? So we want to look at all sides of that as that comes up. Certainly for your customers and your folks who are coming into your business, you can require them to wear a mask, but they are not, if they have a qualifying health reason for not needing to wear a mask, they do not have to do so. And there's no requirement under the statute or the regulations that say, they need to provide you with some sort of doctor's order or something which would say, I can't wear a mask. If you have a customer who comes in and says, I'm unable to wear a mask because of a qualifying medical reason, my suggestion is you allow them to come in and do business, unless you believe that there's another risk factor there.
Yeah, and Jeff's advice would also likely apply to informing other employees who may have come into contact with an infected person, just being sensitive about how you communicate with your employees to, not divulge private information or, other things like that. So that's another important thing to keep in mind.
You do want to make sure that you're respecting the confidentiality of your employees. If you have an employee, and not only respecting, but there's a legal requirement, again, pursuant to the Americans with Disability Act, that health information is going to be confidential. Somebody who's diagnosed with COVID-19, that's going to be considered confidential health information. And you'll want to be sure that you're not divulging the identity of the person. Obviously, if you have 10 people who are working and you alert 9 people that you may have come into contact with a coworker who has now been diagnosed with COVID, and one person's not there at work the next day, everybody's going to figure out who it was. That's not really the concern I have. It's just you can't say John Doe has come down with COVID, and we are now advising you of that, and if you had contact with John, you should go get tested or do whatever the steps are. We can't identify those folks by name, but you can, but you have that obligation to let your employees know that in fact you may have been in contact with a coworker who has tested positive.
So, and the last point, general point for all businesses operating in person, is that you should limit non-essentials. So that whether that's people, so no visitors, nobody that doesn't need to be there to do business should not be there. They're still promoting teleworking and remote working as much as possible. This also includes places. So if you have 3 people in the physical business that need to have a meeting, if they can do a Zoom or telemeeting even while they're all in the same building, that's preferred than meeting person in the same room. And then that also goes for whole places, whole sections of the business. If it's not used, if it doesn't need to be accessible, leave it inaccessible. It'll be one less place you have to worry about to implement all these protocols that we've discussed today. So the last category is businesses that are operating in person that also serve the public. It talks about in a building or a defined space. I would say that that's probably any enclosed area, structure that you want to say. If it's completely outside, this is probably less applicable. And you'll recognize a lot of these if you've done grocery shopping in the past week or so. A lot of grocery stores are implementing these type of measures. To the extent that a business can, it should operate by curbside pickup, appointment, delivery, or standard shipping type measures. They really want to focus on keeping people out of your physical location to the extent possible. If that's not possible, the new requirement is that you can only have 50% occupancy based upon the number on the building's occupancy permit at one time. So you look at the building's occupancy permit and you divide that by half, and that's the number of people that are allowed to be in the building at once. There's another requirement that to change hours to allow proper cleaning and stocking. And I think again, that this is an employee safety type measure. So employees can operate throughout the physical location and avoid coming in with 6 feet contact of each other and then of customers as well. And you can see how difficult that is in some of these big box stores. That even with big shopping aisles and things, it's difficult to stock and shop and keep 6 feet distance all at the same time. Similarly, at checkout, there needs to be 6 feet distance between employees checking out customers. And if that's not possible, then there must be a physical barrier between the customer and the employee. So however, you as an employer want to implement that, it has to be 6 feet or a physical barrier. You've seen for certain businesses, especially grocery stores, are implementing high-risk shopper hours for shoppers that are at a higher risk of contracting the virus. There's a requirement that at least once a week, all businesses provide modified or special hours for those shoppers. So at the minimum, once a week, communicate to shoppers that there's these special hours. Again, another requirement is that all customers wear masks while they're on the premises. There is an exception. There's several exceptions for this. The medical exception that Jeff and I discussed a moment ago. Also, children under 2 years 2 or younger are not required to wear masks. And again, Jeff said that correctly that for customers, there's no documentation required at all. They just need to say that they have a health reason, and then you must allow them to not wear a mask on the premises. Another exception is if the business sells medication, medical supplies, or food, they still are not, they must deny entry to a customer not wearing a mask, but then they also must provide alternate means for that customer to access the services or goods that the business is selling. So if a customer approaches a business that sells food and doesn't have a mask on, you must deny them entry, but you cannot also deny them the ability to access the food. So whether they place their order outside via phone and then something's taken out to them, or curbside pickup, or some modified version of those have to be offered, again, by businesses that sell medication, medical supplies, or food. So a business that does not sell medication, medical supplies, or food may completely deny entry by a person not wearing masks, and then they don't need to make any other type of modification. It's just that you're not allowed in and come back when you're wearing a mask. Finally, for lines, so again, all lines. We're seeing a lot of lines everywhere: entry, exit, shopping in the aisles, and then also trying to purchase items. All lines need to be 6 feet apart. And then all persons in those lines must also be 6 feet apart. So whatever the business needs to do to make sure that that is done, they have to make sure those lines are 6 feet apart. They're recommending shutting down every other aisle, checkout lane, and then every hour switching over to the one that was shut down, cleaning the ones that were previously used, and doing that throughout the course of the day. Similarly, employees must be able to take a hand washing break every hour. So that will require staggering breaks and implementing a new break for employees to go wash their hands. Hand washing seems to be the preferred and most effective method for killing COVID-19. Hand sanitizer does work. I think hand sanitizer break would suffice, but it's some type of cleaning of the hands at least once an hour by employees. And then finally, for carts and items that are owned by the business that shoppers use to shop and better take advantage of the customer experience, after the last use and before the next use, they must be wiped down by an employee. So we're seeing this most frequently with shopping carts and baskets, but I imagine that it's anything that a customer would touch and then another customer would touch later on needs to be wiped down, that there would be similar to a basket or a shopping cart. But that's the brief 25-minute overview of the requirements, and the resources that we provided are a lot longer, but they're definitely worth looking at because they provide more context and more options and ideas for how to implement these measures than what I've just discussed today. So with that overview complete, I think we're going to open up to questions. You can type a question by accessing the More button and the chat feature, which will be sent, your question, you can type it and it will be sent to Hannah, our moderator, and she will let us know what the question is and we'll answer it the best we
can. One of the follow-ups, when you mentioned, when you have an employee who's tested positive, you have these temperature readings that you need to do. Mm-hmm. One thing that employers, keep in mind is the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has given some guidance for employers who are choosing to require monitoring before an employee comes to work. So, we're seeing that, obviously, we're seeing that in healthcare and your nursing homes and places like that, where it's, just paramount that nobody is coming in who may have been exposed. But if you as an employer opt to do some sort of testing before people come to work, that is your prerogative at this point in time. And so you can require folks to do a temperature screen before employees are coming to work. You can ask employees questions such as, have you had a temperature? Has anyone in your household been exposed? Do you have a cough? You can kind of run through a checklist of, symptoms if you want to do that. And in fact, that seems to be kind of a recommended way to go, because obviously one person comes into your workplace, they have it. That could infect, many people in your workplace. And, now you have, 10 people out of work as opposed to one. So, that is your prerogative to do so. It's, again, as Ian mentioned, it's not a requirement, but something I think that is worthwhile considering, at the very least, of asking your employees before each shift a series of 4 or 5 questions. Has anyone in your house exhibited symptoms? Have you exhibited any symptoms? Feverish, cough, etc. And if they're answering yes to any of those, likely sending them home for the day. Mm-hmm. And then waiting to see if they present any symptoms.
And again, a lot of the resources that we've provided really walk you step by step through what you need to do to properly respond to these things. So again, we just did a pretty general overview to try to prompt you to start thinking about these things and look at what we've provided on our website. And then between the posters, the CDC step-by-step guides, they'll really be tailored to an employee or an employer's individual circumstance, depending on, what type of exposure, no exposure, what a day-to-day looks like, and what special circumstances will look like as well. So, Hannah, do you have any questions for us?
I haven't had any come in yet, no.
Okay.
I think that the other thing just to keep in mind is, you're considering this all is a lot of what, the cleaning requirements, the social distancing is very, common sense. It may seem extreme, but it follows sort of a, what you would anticipate to be, the requirements. There's, not a lot of, for lack of a better word, legal nuance here in these requirements. They're pretty straightforward. And I understand that a lot of us, for reasons that are frustrated and are trying to get through this, and this is what the experts are advising at this point. We are providing this along to you guys as what the requirements are, but understanding that this is a difficult time and one that we are all having to adjust to.
And it is something that I think now that we know that May 8th looks like a drop dead date when we might see some opening up of Pennsylvania businesses, I think more extreme measures and requirements like this are meant to allow more businesses to open up and under greater freedom as far as the type of operations that they may perform. So while you are currently hopefully operating in person, and these are more requirements that will allow the rest of Pennsylvania's economy hopefully to open up a little more. And we keep talking about the new normal, and this might be what the new normal looks like. We haven't heard anything about being able to have large gatherings or anything sort of social that way. So for all businesses to open up, it might be under these types of restrictions for many, many months, if not, significant portions of this year and possibly next year to come. So this might be something that is just a way of life for businesses to operate in person now. So it's you all are on the ground floor for implementing these measures to begin with, and now's the time to master them and to get them down better than anyone else before they open.
So it looks like we have a couple really good questions.
Great.
The first would be, if an employee is claiming that they cannot wear a mask due to a medical condition, should you ask that medical condition be documented by a physician?
Yes. I mean, that's, and again, I think we're going to have to look at these on, case by case basis, and to the extent that you're aware of an existing medical condition that this employee's already requested maybe, previous accommodations for, you might already have medical documentation and that might not be necessary. But as a general rule, if an employee is coming to you and saying, I'm unable to wear a mask because I have a medical condition, my recommendation is that you're seeking some type of documentation, understanding, of course, that we're not at a place where doctors have the availability that they once did just to see patients, and nor do people really want to go see the doctor at this point. So it may be an email from a doctor which simply confirms that Joe has asthma and shouldn't wear a mask. I don't think that this would be a burden on the employee, but it should be some sort of documentation that sets forth why the employee cannot wear a mask. And then I think, again, we'll want to consider on a case-by-case basis, what's the employee's role, what are they doing, and is it appropriate for that employee to continue in that role at this time without wearing a mask? And if it doesn't seem to be the case, we may be looking at reassignment of duties, or it may be, simply having that employee take the time off during this time.
Yes, and the masks don't need to be worn during, say, a smoke break or a lunch break as well. So, I mean, employees are concerned about, discomfort during those times, or they're taking a water break or something, they can remove their masks, obviously, for those types of activities.
Okay, so the next question is from an individual who has a remodeling business. They're asking, since May 8th, construction is allowed, are there any guidelines for working in clients' homes, i.e. regarding cleaning requirements or asking clients to wear masks?
So we know that on May 8th, construction will open up, but under limited circumstances and conditions. Unfortunately, we don't know what those limited circumstances or conditions are, but I imagine that they're going to be very similar and extensive to the ones that we just discussed for in-person operations. I also think it would be prudent to act as if you are performing an in-person operation when you're in anybody else's home. So essentially treat that as your business premises for the duration of performing the services, and implement, these types of measures. It'll go a long way in helping your clientele feel safe, and it'll also keep you safe from the client, from any potential exposure from inside the client's home. It's definitely a mutual type of responsibility. Everyone's actions here protect everyone else, and I think that's important to keep in mind.
And I suspect we're going to be seeing some additional guidance. The Governor Wolf and Secretary Levine have been pretty diligent about updating, sometimes to our frustration, because it feels like we get one set of guidance, and then 3 days later there's an additional rubric of guidance that comes out. So we're all and to their credit, I mean they're dealing with this on a day-by-day basis as well. But I expect we'll get some additional guidance from them once we get closer to the time when we're going to really fully open up construction again.
Okay, the next question is, all of the requirements that you talked about, are those requirements for a person in a closed office, or are these just applying to businesses that deal with the public? For example, somebody who is in the office answering the phone or doing payroll.
So the cleaning requirements, so the categories again are cleaning, probable or confirmed case response, and then serving the public. The cleaning and probable confirmed case response is for any in-person operation. So that's for anyone in a business, whether it's an employee, vendor, or a visitor, or anyone. The serving the public requirements start when we started discussing about occupancy, checkout lines, wiping down baskets and things. So those are where it's serving the public in a defined space when I started discussing occupancy and things like that. But all the cleaning requirements, all the testing, if you come into contact with, the business comes into contact with a probable or confirmed case, those apply to anyone that's performing in-person operations, whether that's public facing or you're just having your employees come into the office to do their work.
Ian, what about wearing masks? In an office setting, would you require all your employees to wear masks?
Yes, all employees are required to wear masks when they're on the business premises.
And so the same for the social distancing. If
Yes.
you're in an office space, the best course of action, if you are in an office or otherwise in some manufacturing setting that's indoors but not client facing, is again, you're going to want to adhere to those cleaning protocols, adhere to the social distancing, limiting any collective spaces that you might have, whether that's the lunchroom or other areas. People aren't congregating around the water cooler right now. If you're in an office space, the people are staying in their office for the majority of the day, maybe except to go to the bathroom. There's requirements that you have discretion as well to tell people, we're not we're closing down the lunchroom. We don't have a microwave that's available at this point in time. Employees are required to bring, a sandwich, eat in your office, eat out in your car, whatever the case may be. You do have some leverage there, to make those requirements for your employees, even if, what the government's requiring, is less than. You can go above and beyond that as well, to ensure that you're not seeing that congregation of employees in those areas where employees tend to congregate.
Mhm. Yeah, and that would also go for all other types of breaks and when employees are coming to work and leaving work to avoid, the key, I guess, would be social distancing at all times and all places. Even when you're just passing in the halls, if you can avoid it, that's the type of measures that all employers that are operating right now need to take for their employees.
And then to the mask thing again, if you've got employees who are not interacting with other coworkers because they're in an office space, and they've got a door closed, I don't think that there's going to be a need for them to wear a mask while they're sitting in their own office. But, you got employees out on the manufacturing floor, yeah, those employees should always be wearing a mask.
And if an employee struggles with putting on a mask when they leave their office, you might need to crack down. It's very important that they're wearing masks when they may or even might come into contact with another person. It's important, and it's also about wearing a mask so you don't touch your face and then touch something else in the office. So the requirement is very strict. It says the employee has to wear a mask when on the business premises. So if you want to draw that hard line, which is what the order says, then you're well within your rights to say at all times, from the time you step here until you leave, you have to have a mask on.
It does look like a good follow-up question somebody asked. If an employee is sitting in a private office with no other employees in that office, do they need to wear a mask all of the time?
So I'll just quote the language for you. It says, provide masks for employees to wear during their time at the business and make it mandatory requirement to wear a mask while on the work site, except to the extent an employee is using break time to eat or drink. And employers may approve masks obtained or made by employees in accordance with CDC guidelines. So it very flatly says, unless you're eating or drinking, you're wearing a mask if you're on the business premises.
And again, if you have your door closed and no one can see you, that's, that's up to you, I guess. That's, as Ian said, that's what that's what the regulation provides. That's what the order provides. Obviously if somebody's in an office with a closed door, do they need to wear a mask? I think I'll let that up to you guys to make that call.
So the next question shifts gears a little bit. This individual says that they've received a PPP loan last Wednesday, and they have to use all the funds within an 8-week period to be forgiven. And they're asking whether it's okay to have their employees stay on unemployment until they know their reopen date and then prepay them for the next 8 weeks, or should they rehire them and start paying them even though they cannot work under the stay-at-home order?
So that's a good question. One that we're not quite prepared to answer today. The PPP loans have, just as a general rule, there is a 75% of that PPP loan needs to be used to pay for payroll. There's an 8-week spend down period for that. So once you receive the PPP loan, you have 8 weeks to spend down that PPP loan. There's a lot of nuances in between all of that. So we're going to have to look at those on a case-by-case basis as to the extent of your payroll, if you've reduced salaries or other compensation, how soon you're able to bring those employees back, and sort of what makes sense for you under the specifics of your situation.
Yeah, because it is both a 75% payroll requirement, but also an employee retention requirement, either based upon number of employees or salary. So there's a lot of dynamic moving parts there, and to give you a real targeted answer, we would want to look at that first, I think.
The next question is, do we need to send in the UC 1921W refusal of suitable work if we offer a laid off employee work again and they do not wish to come back due to the fear of contracting COVID-19?
All right, that's a good question. And again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So I think if you have employees who are refusing to return to work, let's discuss that, because there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. One of the considerations you're going to need to make is, does that employee have an underlying health condition, a doctor's recommendation that they're not in the workplace or not out in the general public? If you have an employee who comes back to you and says, I have asthma, I have COPD, I have cystic fibrosis, I'm at high risk. Likely, we're going to be looking at that through a consideration of the Americans with Disability Act and whether or not a reasonable accommodation needs to be provided to that employee. So we're going to have to consider that. On the other end of it is you have an employee who doesn't have any underlying health conditions, but is kind of hanging out there saying, look, I'm getting this unemployment comp, I'm getting this additional $600 a week. Some people, some senators had feared that, how are we going to get employees to come back to work if they're otherwise able and available to work, but they're making more money on unemployment comp? And the simple answer is, you require them to do so. And if they're refusing to do so, you're alerting the unemployment comp office as such. But before you would do that, again, we want to understand the universe of what's going on here. So if somebody says, I have an underlying health condition, I can't come to work, or I have childcare requirements because under the Families First Act, there's that extension of the FMLA for childcare, and also the extension of paid leave for certain qualifying conditions. So we want to look at that. If you get to the end of that, those questions, and the answer pretty much is simply, I don't want to come back to work because I don't want to get sick, but I don't have an underlying health condition, and I'm otherwise just not interested in returning to work at this point, then yeah, we might look at that and say, this is a voluntary termination of employment because we have work that's available to the employee and the employee's refusing suitable work. And in which case, we would want to contact the UC office, the unemployment comp office, and let them know we have an employee who's currently collecting benefits, but who's refusing suitable work.
It looks like that may be the last question for the time being.
Well, if you guys have additional questions, you know where to find us. At my email is jworley, JWORLEY @gkh.com. You can find us on our website as well, gkh.com. Those resources should have been mailed to everybody. Hopefully they get through to you. If you don't get a copy, they're available on our website. We have a whole line of resources there to address various considerations with regard to what we're going through currently. We're also interested in hearing about, other things that you guys are interested in at this point, operating your business, other concerns and considerations. We'd like to continue to have these webinars on a fairly regular basis, just to keep you guys appraised of what's going on here. Ian, do you have anything else to add here?
No, but I think that more of these are going, more orders and more regulations are going to come out that people are going to need to comply with. And we're here to keep abreast of all those changes and to inform you and how it will affect your business. So just keep your eye out for more resources from GKH.
Well, again, thanks for joining us. These are incredibly strange times that we're in. And keep up the good work, and be safe, be well, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.